Dear student, welcome to my channel. My name is Mohammad Ibrar. I am a vocational trainer of Muragacha Shubodhini Girls High School. Today, my topic is communication basics. As we know, we all human being is a socio-human person who used to communicate each other in every moment. So there is a basic principle which we are going to follow in these slides. Let us see what is communication means. Here you can see the communication, the importing or exchanging of information by speaking, writing or using some other medium. Means in any way, if you are communicating with any other person, it may be in writing or using other medium like words or any other language, it is called communication. Moving to the next slide, here you can see two children are communicating each other. Here, as in the picture, you can see one child is trying to speak and the other child is trying to hear. This process is known as communication. So communication is in both way. If you are saying and the other person is listening, and after listening, if he is giving his consent or if he is giving his approval that I am listening to you, it means the communication is happening. If alone you are communicating and nobody is giving you feedback, that cannot be called as a communication. Moving to the next slide. Now in this slide we will see about the different types of communication. Majorly there are three kinds of communication: the verbal communication, the non-verbal communication and the written communication. Coming to the number one, which is verbal communication. The verbal communication is the sharing of information between two individuals by using speech. So in verbal communication, the medium is speech, means language. If we are communicating with other person through a language, this is called a verbal communication. Suppose in this YouTube video, I am delivering a speech on the chapter communication. So here my medium is communication. Here the medium is my language. Now here in the picture you can see a young lady is trying to scold a student. So she is trying to scold the student in language in a language using by a language. So if you are communicating with other person by using a language, this is called verbal communication. Moving to the next slide, non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication is behavior and elements of speech aside from the word themselves that transmit meaning. In this slide, you will come to know that instead of using language, the communication can happen through our body language. Suppose if you are liking something, then you will nod your head in a positive manner. That will be a communication through body part. Suppose you are angry. Now look at this slide. Here in this slide you can see a lady is trying to show a posture which shows that she is anger. So that anger is a show of communication, and that communication is called non-verbal communication. Moving to the next slide. Here you can see the different postures of this slide. Here anger, joy, surprise, disgust, sadness and fear expressions are given. Now in the next slide we will talk about written communication. Written communication involves any types of message that makes use of the written words. It means if we are communicating to other person in writing, this communication will be called as a written communication. Suppose in these days we used to do WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, or even we are writing a letter to give such information to other person. That communication will be called as written communication. Look at the image. Here in the image you can see something is being written. So that writing is called written communication. Moving to the next slide, we will see there is a two kind of communication based on purpose and style. First is formal communication and the other one is informal communication. Formal communication means if you are talking with some other person whom you don't know, or formally you are communicating with him. Suppose if a student is communicating with his teacher, or in an office both the subordinate and the manager is communicating each other, that communication will be called as a formal communication. Now the next part is informal communication. Informal communication happens within the family or among the friends. Suppose if you are knowing someone very well, so that with that person you will communicate in a informal way. Look at the image, the more thing will be clear. Now here you can see in an office there is a meeting is happening. This meeting is a kind of formal meeting and everyone is a colleague or subordinate or manager. So in this image you can see people are communicating each other in a formal way. Now in the next slide you can see two person, one is a child and there is a baby. So they are communicating each other in an informal way. Now moving to the next slide, here this is a communication channel. How this communication used to happen? First you can see there is a sender. That sender used to speak or try to give some information to the receiver. Once the receiver get the messages, that receiver used to give his feedback whether he listened or understand or not. If the receiver is giving his feedback whatever messages he received, then the communication will be complicated. In case the sender is giving message and the receiver is not giving feedback, that cannot be called as a communication. So communication is a both way channel. Sender used to send message, receiver after getting the message he used to deliver his feedback to the sender. Moving to the next slide, here there are 5 or 4 major kinds and principles of communication. So these principles are very important while you are making any communication with other person. First is completeness, means whenever you are trying to communicate with other person, the communication should be in a very complete manner. Whatever information or messages you have, it should be in complete manner. Suppose if you tell to the other person go come, that cannot be called as a communication, because here the sentence is not completed. If you say the same thing to the person that go, you go, I will come, then the communication will be complete. Now the next part is clarity. Whenever you are trying to communicate with other person, that communication should be in a very clear manner. Whatever language you are using, that language should be very clear. Next, the point is concreteness. That should be very orderly manner. If you communicate, the communication should be in a very sequence, proper use of grammar and the word. And the next and the most important part is eye contact. This is a very important in verbal communication. Suppose if you are speaking to someone, then eye contact should be made, because without the eye contact the communication cannot be completed. Moving to the next slide, communication barrier. As we know, if we are communicating with other person, there are kind of hurdles or the barrier we find. That barrier can happen through many ways. Here in my slide I have discussed 4 basic barriers. First is language barrier. If the communication is not happening in a same language, that is called as a communication barrier. Suppose if I am communicating with some other person in the other language, that language is not known to that person, that will be called as a language barrier. Suppose if I am speaking Bengali to some Telugu person, that Telugu person cannot understand Bengali, and here the language barrier comes. Next, the psychological barriers. Psychological barrier is, suppose mentally you are not prepared or some mental disbalance is going on, then in that case you even not communicate with other person. The next point is physical barrier. Suppose you are physically very tired or physically you are not fit, some kind you may have fever. In that case you don't like to communicate with other person, so this is a kind of physical barrier where you are unable to speak to some other person. Now the fourth and the last one is attitudinal barrier. In this point you will see that you are not prepared to listen to someone. Suppose here you like or dislike. If you're disliking someone's speech, then you won't listen to him. So here the factor is attitude. Your attitude prohibits or your attitude agree to listen to someone else. So here we have seen 4 basic communication barriers. Thank you.